The rain had not stopped for days. It came down in sheets, flooding gutters, streaking across windshields, drowning the world in a sound like endless static. The sky itself seemed torn open, the clouds sagging low and black as though they meant to smother the neighborhood below. Daniel Cross tightened his grip on the steering wheel as his old sedan climbed the winding hill. The wipers beat frantically, but the rain was relentless, splashing against the glass, distorting the road ahead into shifting blurs of grey and yellow. At the crest of the hill, the cul-de-sac spread out before him, silent, half forgotten, its houses dim in the stormlight. There were no children's bikes, no cars in driveways, no curtains pulled back to watch the weather, just dark windows and empty porches. At the far end of the circle, half hidden beneath the skeletal arms of two dying oaks, sat the house he had bought. It was larger than he remembered from the photos online. The gabled roof hunched like a giant's back, the brick walls stained darker by the rain, the windows reflecting not the storm but something faintly golden. The house had been cheap, suspiciously cheap for the size, but Daniel had chalked it up to luck, to timing, to his desperation to start over. Now, staring at it through the rain, he felt something twist low in his gut. It looked alive, but he forced the thought aside. He had been on edge for weeks, nerves stretched thin by debt, exhaustion, and the gnawing sense that his life had gone nowhere. This was supposed to be a new beginning, a chance to breathe again. Daniel pulled into the driveway. The gate at the side creaked open at the touch of his hand, almost too easily, as though it had been waiting. He tried not to think about that. Inside, the air was warm, too warm. It pressed against him like breath as he crossed the threshold. The smell of dust and old wood clinging thick in his nose, and then he saw them. Portraits, at least a dozen of them, lined the foyer, each one massive, framed in gilded wood, towering over him as he stepped inside. They filled the hall, stretching up toward the second floor, their eyes following him in silence. Daniel froze. The paintings were detailed disturbingly so. A man with hollow cheeks and a pinched mouth, a woman with hair pinned tight, her expression grim, a child clutching a wooden horse, an elderly woman whose eyes gleamed wetly in the dim light. Each one was staring directly at him. The storm cracked outside, thunder rattling the windows. Daniel swallowed hard, forcing a laugh. Guess they liked decorating with ancestors, but the portraits didn't feel decorative. They felt watchful, not like subjects of paintings, but like sentinels. Their gazes were unbroken, fixed, intense, and as he stepped deeper into the house, he felt every one of them tilt toward him, like they knew him, like they had been waiting, unpacking the silence. The first 2 days passed in silence. Daniel spent them carrying boxes from the car, setting them in corners, wandering through rooms he could barely believe belonged to him. The place was enormous: high ceilings, wide halls, a study filled with books thick with dust, a basement that smelled faintly of damp stone. But no matter where he went, the portraits followed. They were everywhere, in the foyer, the stairwell, the long hall to the kitchen. At first, he thought it was just his imagination, but soon he realized every portrait's eyes were painted to face directly forward. No matter the angle, no matter where he stood, they seemed to lock with his own. At night, he caught himself whispering apologies as he passed them, as though afraid to offend. The silence of the house pressed heavily against him, broken only by the occasional groan of settling wood. He slept poorly. He dreamed of faces looming over him, whispering words he couldn't hear. On the third night, he woke to find himself sitting upright on the couch in the living room, heart hammering, the sound of breathing in his ears, not his breathing, slow, heavy, drawn out. It came from the walls. The first disturbance. Daniel grabbed the lamp beside him, flicking it on with trembling fingers. The portraits in the foyer glowed faintly in the light, their eyes shimmering. He blinked hard. For an instant, he swore their expressions had changed. The man with hollow cheeks smirked, the woman with pinned hair sneered. The child looked sorrowful. Daniel rubbed his face. I'm losing it. But then, as he turned away, he heard it, a voice, small, thin. Leave. He spun back. The child's painted mouth was open. Daniel staggered closer, his breath shallow. He stared at the canvas. The boy's lips twitched again. His eyes gleamed wetly, not like paint at all, but like flesh. Leave, while you can. The words were little more than a whisper, but they hit Daniel like a scream. He stumbled back, his chest tight. He didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, he tried to laugh it off. Lack of sleep, stress, the echo of his own thoughts. But the more he tried to convince himself, the more the house fought against him. Books fell off shelves with no explanation. The power flickered when he walked the halls at night. Doors creaked open by themselves, swinging wide as though inviting him deeper. And the portraits, sometimes when he turned a corner, he found himself face to face with one he didn't remember seeing before, a new portrait as if it had always been there. He counted them one night 16. The next morning, there were 17, and every night, the whispers grew louder. At first, just the child, then the others, a chorus of murmurs, impossible to decipher, building until he couldn't tell whether it came from the walls or from inside his own head. Get out, run, too late. By the 5th day, Daniel had decided he couldn't stay. The cheap price, the fresh start, none of it mattered. The house was wrong. He packed what little he'd unpacked into the car. his hands shaking as he stuffed boxes into the trunk. The portraits seemed to watch from the windows, their painted faces dimly visible behind the glass. He didn't look back, but the road didn't end. He drove down the street, past the leaning oak tree, past the broken lamppost at the corner. The rain had stopped, but the world felt muffled, as though wrapped in cotton. 5 minutes later, the house appeared again. He thought he'd made a wrong turn. He doubled back, took another street, but the road bent again. Always back to the cul-de-sac, the leaning oak, the lamppost, the house at the end. Waiting for 2 hours, Daniel drove, sweat dripping down his back, his hands white-knuckled on the wheel, and every time, no matter the direction, the road circled back. By the time he pulled into the driveway again, his vision blurred from exhaustion. He was shaking. The house loomed above him, patient, and when he staggered back inside, the portraits were smiling. That night, Daniel sat in the foyer, staring at the portraits in the dim light. He whispered at them, begging for answers, demanding explanations, pleading for a way out. The child stared back, eyes glistening. The hollow-cheeked man smirked wider. The woman's lips parted, just slightly, as though she were about to speak. Daniel buried his face in his hands. He had thought the house would be his salvation. Instead, it was his prison, and deep in the walls, the breathing grew louder, like the house itself was alive, like it was waiting. Daniel stopped pretending. The house was wrong, and he knew it. Every night the whispers grew louder. Every morning the portrait seemed different. Sometimes he counted 17, sometimes 18, once even 19. Their faces shifted subtly, as if trying to communicate something without words. On the 8th day, while digging through the study, Daniel found a drawer he hadn't noticed before. Hidden at the very back was a false panel, and behind it, a bundle of papers tied with fraying string. His hand shook so hard. The pages rattled. A final scrawl at the bottom made his skin crawl. To live here is to be consumed. Daniel shoved the papers back into the drawer, his stomach heaving. The portraits seemed to loom closer, their gazes digging into him. That night, he dreamed of sinking into canvas, his skin cracking into paint, his mouth frozen mid-scream, his eyes stuck wide open. At dawn, he tried again. He drove until the gaslight blinked red. Every turn, every shortcut, every desperate attempt spat him. Back at the same cul-de-sac, the leaning oak, the cracked lamppost, the house at the end. Patient as ever, he tried walking. Hours passed under grey sky, but no matter how far his feet carried him, the road folded back into itself, the horizon bent like paper being creased, and the pages were brittle. The ink faded, but the words froze him. This house does not shelter, it does not protect, it chooses, it feeds. Daniel's breath caught. He turned the page. We are not dead, we are not alive, we are preserved. Faces on the wall, eyes for the house, it keeps us here, forever. He collapsed on the steps, panting, his jeans soaked with mud. The front door creaked open without his touch, and from inside, the voices whispered, louder now, clearer, you cannot leave, it keeps us, it keeps you. Daniel pressed his palms against his ears until they hurt, but the voices weren't outside, they were inside his skull. When he stumbled inside, the foyer seemed darker, heavier, and in the center of the wall, there was a new portrait. His stomach turned. It was a man he had never seen before, but the style was fresher, the paint wet, as if newly finished. The man's expression was frozen in despair, eyes wide, mouth half open like a gasp. Daniel realized the portraits weren't decorative. They were records of everyone who had lived here before. The days bled into each other. Daniel couldn't remember when he'd last eaten, when he'd last slept properly. The house seemed to sap his strength, replacing it with something else: dread, nausea, emptiness. The whispers never stopped now. Sometimes they came from the walls, sometimes from the portraits, sometimes from the floor itself. When he pressed his ear to the wood, he could hear breathing, slow, steady, as if the house had lungs. Once, he pressed his palm to the wall and swore he felt it pulse beneath his hand, warm like living flesh. The books in the study had changed, too. Their titles rearranged themselves, spine splitting open to reveal new words: soil and sacrifice. The feeding house, eternal harvest. He threw one into the fire. The smoke that poured out was thick, acrid, and smelled like burning hair. That night, the hollow-cheeked man in the portrait whispered to him directly, the house does not kill, it keeps, it drinks us, forever. Daniel screamed at it, shaking the frame, but the canvas only rippled like skin, and the painted eyes rolled wetly to look at him. On the 12th night, Daniel woke to find himself standing in the foyer without memory of leaving his bed. The portraits glowed faintly in the dark, their eyes wet and gleaming. The largest portrait, a severe woman in black, rippled like water. Her painted mouth opened, and a voice poured out, not hers but something far older. Do you want to know why? Daniel froze, breath caught in his throat. The voice filled the hall, deep and resonant, vibrating through his bones. This house is older than brick, older than wood. It was not built, it was grown. The walls pulsed once, as though in agreement, seeded in blood, rooted in soil, a womb of hunger. Every century, it blooms, its fruit is flesh, its nectar is memory. Daniel staggered back, shaking his head. You lie. The portraits convulsed, painted arms pushed against canvas, mouths opening in screams that merged into one sound, a guttural roar. We do not lie. We are its marrow, its meat. You will be too. The floor beneath him trembled, the walls bulged, stretched, then contracted. As though the house itself were breathing, Daniel clawed at the front door. The wood turned soft under his nails, not wood at all, but flesh, warm and wet. Flexing with his touch, he screamed. Behind him, the portraits laughed. Daniel stopped counting the days. The house swallowed time as easily as it swallowed everything else. He grew thinner, weaker, though he never starved. Hunger gnawed at him, but food no longer mattered. Sleep came only in bursts filled with visions of paint, canvas, screaming faces. He began to see his own reflection in strange places, not in mirrors, but in the shine of a window, in the glass covering a portrait, his own face, but not his painted. Frozen, terrified, on the final night, the foyer was waiting. The portraits glistened wetly in the dark. A new frame stood empty at the center of the wall, gilded, ornate, larger than the others. It is time, whispered the hollow-cheeked man. Daniel shook his head, backing away. No, no, I won't. But the walls pulsed again, a deep, shuddering thrum. His legs buckled. He felt the house dragging him, pulling him forward, the air thick and heavy as tar. He screamed as his body slammed against the empty canvas. It was not flat, it was soft, pliable, sucking him inward like wet clay. He clawed at the frame, nails ripping, but the canvas swallowed his arms, his chest, his face. The last thing he saw was the child, the one who had warned him, staring sorrowfully as Daniel was consumed. The next morning, the storm had passed. Sunlight touched the cul-de-sac, glinting off wet pavement. The neighborhood was still silent, still dead, but the house gleamed in the light as though freshly painted. In the foyer, the portraits were silent, but among them, a new face had joined. Daniel Cross, eyes wide with terror, mouth frozen mid-scream. The house sighed, its hunger sated for now, and on the lawn outside, a new sign had appeared: for sale.